He thought he knew his wife, but everything changed in an instant. When Mark found out that his beloved wife was spending time with another man, he decided he wouldn't let this go without consequences. This isn't just betrayal. It's the story of how she took everything, but didn't account for what he could do. Will he stay silent, or turn it all to his advantage? Amanda had no idea that her affair could lead to such revenge. If she had known it would be just the beginning of her downfall, she might have never cheated. Don't miss this. This story will change your perception of true revenge. She cheated on me with Alex, but I decided to teach her a lesson she will never forget. Mark was sitting in his office, staring at the computer monitor. The work wasn't progressing, even though the deadline was breathing down his neck. He remembered how Amanda had said in the morning that she would be late because of her meeting with colleagues. For some reason, that phrase sounded different today. His intuition, usually silent, suddenly sent a signal. He decided that a walk to the kitchen might help him focus. Stopping by the table, Mark noticed her notebook. Amanda rarely left her things in plain sight, but this time the notebook lay right on the table. The black cover was familiar, but a bright red bookmark stuck out from inside the notebook. "Well, that's not like you, Amanda," he muttered, opening the page. Inside the notebook was a list, addresses, dates, and names. Among them, one name was underlined in red, Alex. His heart skipped a beat. Alex? He knew all of Amanda's colleagues, but this name meant nothing to him. When Amanda returned home, she looked cheerful. Dinner, prepared in advance, was on the table, and she tossed her purse onto the couch before heading straight to the refrigerator. "How was your day?" Mark asked, watching her movements. "Oh, great. We discussed an important project today. Everything's so intense, but interesting. How about you?" Her tone was normal, but Mark felt she was avoiding his gaze. "Nothing special. Got a few things done," he replied, as if paying no attention to her behavior. During dinner, she was unexpectedly silent. Her phone, usually lying nearby, was in her purse, which surprised Mark. "So, who's this new colleague? Alex?" he asked, trying to sound casual. Amanda paused for a moment, but then answered, "Alex? Just one of our clients. Why do you ask?" "I read your note on the table. Something interesting?" he added with a slight smile. "Oh, just a project to-do list. Nothing special." Her voice was calm, but her movements became a bit nervous. Mark didn't push the conversation further. He knew that direct questions would only make her more cautious. That same evening, when Amanda fell asleep, Mark found her phone. It wasn't password protected, which surprised him. Among the messages, nothing seemed suspicious until he opened the chat with Alex. "You looked stunning today. When's the next meeting?" Mark carefully read the message but decided not to act yet. He took screenshots of the conversation and placed the phone back. The next day, Amanda said she had an important meeting downtown. Mark decided to act. "I might swing by the store near your office today," he said, watching her reaction. "Oh, the office is closed today. We're meeting somewhere else," she replied. Her response only deepened his suspicions. He installed tracking software on her phone. In the evening, when she left, he checked the map. She wasn't at the office or even a restaurant. Her location showed a small hotel on the outskirts of town. He arrived there half an hour later. Her car was parked outside. Mark got out and headed to the reception desk. "Good evening. I have a meeting with Alex. Could you tell me which room he's in?" he asked calmly. "Alex?" "Yes, I believe there's a booking under that name." "Let me check," the receptionist replied. Mark felt his throat tighten. He hadn't expected it to be so obvious. Amanda had always drawn attention from men. Her confidence, grace, and sharp mind were traits that immediately set her apart. When they first married, Mark had been proud that his wife was so charismatic and successful. But lately, she had changed. Her constant busyness, phone calls behind closed doors, and frequent late nights at work had become reasons for doubt. One evening, when Amanda was late again, Mark sat in the living room, scrolling through her social media profile. He tried to find any hint of changes in her life, but found nothing suspicious. Her page was filled with standard photos, meetings with colleagues, conferences, dinners. Everything looked as though she was living completely transparently, but his intuition told him it was just a facade. A few days later, Mark accidentally overheard her phone conversation. He walked into the bedroom without her noticing. "Yes, I understand," she said, clutching the phone in her hand. Her voice was slightly muffled. "No, not now. He's home." Mark froze in the doorway. Amanda turned sharply towards him and smiled, covering the receiver with her hand. "Oh, it's Jennifer. She's asking about our meeting tomorrow." Her explanation came too quickly. Mark nodded, but he felt she was hiding something. He decided not to cause a scene, but to find a way to uncover the truth. The next morning, Amanda informed him that she had a long meeting ahead. "Don't wait for me before 8, she said, giving Mark a hug before leaving. "Love you." Her words sounded sincere, but Mark couldn't shake off his suspicions. He waited until she left and decided to act. The first thing that came to his mind was to find out more about the mysterious Alex. He had first heard the name during their work-related conversation, and ever since, it hadn't left his mind. Mark began with a simple online search, but found nothing. No social media, articles, or mentions in professional circles. Alex seemed to be a ghost. In the evening, when Amanda was once again busy with her things, Mark dared to look through her computer. In her email, he found several messages signed by Alex, but they all related to work. There was no hint of anything suspicious. However, one of the emails caught his attention. In it, Alex invited Amanda to an exclusive event at a club downtown. Mark saved this information and decided to proceed carefully. The next time Amanda said she'd be late, he headed to the club. He arrived early and decided to observe who was coming and going. While watching, Mark saw Amanda enter. She looked stunning in an elegant black dress. It was impossible to take his eyes off her. But most importantly, she didn't seem like she was at a business meeting. Her movements were confident, and she disappeared into the crowd. Mark decided to follow her inside. The club was dark, and loud music was playing. He couldn't immediately spot where Amanda was, so he decided to wait by the bar. A few minutes later, he noticed her. She was sitting at a table with a man. He looked much younger than Mark had expected. Their conversation was lively, and they seemed very close. Mark didn't want to approach them immediately. He decided to wait and see how things developed. When Amanda stood up and headed for the exit, he decided to take the opportunity and approached Alex. "Hi," Mark started, trying to sound calm. "You're Alex, right?" Alex looked up and smiled. "Yes, and you are?" "I'm Mark, Amanda's husband. We've never met before, but I thought I should come over and say hello." Alex looked slightly embarrassed but quickly regained his composure. "Oh, of course. Amanda has told me a lot about you. Nice to meet you." Mark extended his hand for a handshake, but felt the situation becoming tense. He decided not to linger. When Mark returned home, Amanda was already there. She looked irritated. "Where have you been?" she asked. "Just decided to take a walk," Mark replied. "How was your meeting?" "It went great," she answered, but her voice sounded a bit nervous. Mark decided not to reveal anything just yet. He knew this was only the beginning. The next few days passed quietly. Amanda stayed home, spending time with Mark. She was gentle and attentive, as if trying to make up for her frequent lateness. Mark noticed these changes and thought maybe his suspicions were unfounded. However, something still bothered him. Amanda had become quieter, avoided talking about her colleagues, and shared fewer little tidbits that used to be part of their evening conversations. "You're not very talkative today," Mark remarked one evening while they were sitting in the kitchen. "Just tired," Amanda replied, sipping her tea. "Work takes a lot of energy." Mark nodded, but couldn't help noticing that she didn't look tired at all. Rather, she seemed lost in her own thoughts. A few days later, Amanda brought up the idea of moving to another city. "What do you think, Mark? What if we started over somewhere else? New house, new job. It could be interesting, right?" Mark was surprised. They had always loved their house, even though the mortgage created a financial strain. "Amanda, we just settled everything here. What's going on?" he asked, trying to hide his surprise. "I don't know," she shrugged. "I just feel like I'm tired of the routine." Mark simply nodded, but new doubts started to arise inside him. They had both dreamed of having a child, and moving hadn't been part of their plans. Moreover, Amanda had always been active in creating a cozy home, but now even those simple things seemed to no longer interest her. One evening, while they were having dinner, Amanda suddenly asked, "What do you think, Mark, if you were offered a lot of money, but it was a strange way to earn it, would you agree?" Mark looked up, surprised by her question. "What kind of strange way?" he asked. "And why are you asking this?" Amanda smiled and looked away. "Oh, nothing special. Just thinking out loud." Her response was so vague that Mark couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something. A few minutes later, she spoke again, this time about her work. "Our client, Alex," she started, trying to sound casual. "He's a very interesting guy. We got talking about life and making money. He shared a few ideas about how to make quick cash." Mark became alert. "Alex? Is this the same one you mentioned a few months ago?" "Maybe," Amanda replied, pretending not to remember. "We have a lot of clients, but this one will definitely stick with me. He's very smart and thinks outside the box." Mark simply nodded, but this conversation raised even more questions. Why was she so interested in this person? And what kind of money-making ideas was he suggesting? The next day, while Amanda was at work, Mark decided to check her laptop. He found a few messages from Alex. They were quite neutral, but the frequency of them raised his suspicions. Alex was writing to her much more often than any of her other clients. One evening, when Amanda was again sitting at her computer, Mark tried to bring up their future plans. "Are you still thinking about moving?" he asked. Amanda paused for a moment. "Maybe. I just want something new." "New? But we were planning on having a child," Mark reminded her. Amanda sighed and shook her head. "It's very complicated, Mark. I'm not sure now is the best time for those things." Her words struck him deeply. Mark felt that their dream of starting a family was no longer a priority for her. The next week, he decided to talk to one of her colleagues, who worked with her in the same department. Mark ran into him at a cafe by chance. "Hi, Tom," Mark started. "How's work going?" Tom looked a little surprised, but decided to continue the conversation. "Nothing special. Work is work. How about that client, Alex?" Amanda mentioned him. Tom paused for a moment. "Alex? Oh, yes, I've heard about him. He seems to be quite an influential guy. Amanda works with him very closely." "Closely?" Mark asked. "Yeah, they even discussed a few projects together in an informal setting." Mark understood that these words might have a double meaning. Mark drove home, thinking over the situation. Amanda wasn't home yet. Mark sat at the kitchen table, staring at the clock. Time passed, but Amanda still hadn't returned. Her workday should have ended by now, and she was usually home by this time. He tried to distract himself, grabbed his laptop, and tried to get some work done, but his mind kept returning to the strange conversations that had been happening around his wife recently. The day before, her colleague had told him that Alex, the mysterious man whom Amanda claimed was just a client, was actually planning to buy their company. He was not only wealthy but very influential, although he was rarely seen in the public eye. What bothered Mark even more was that Alex often visited their office and spent a lot of time with Amanda. They even stay after work sometimes, and Alex said he wants to buy our company soon and finalize the contract, her colleague had said. Alex always invites Amanda for long talks. Mark tried to turn this into a joke, but inside, he felt a sense of unease. She never stayed this late before. What's going on? Why is Alex always around her? That evening, when Mark returned home, he immediately noticed that Amanda wasn't there. He dialed her number. She answered after several long rings. "Hi." Her voice sounded a bit nervous. "What's up? Where are you?" Mark asked. "You were supposed to be home." "Oh, I'm at the mall," she replied. "Just looking at some new things." "At the mall? At this time?" Mark tried to hide his surprise. "Why's that?" "Well, I got a little extra money. Thought I'd treat myself." "I'm going to buy something nice," she spoke quickly, as if hurrying to end the conversation. "All right, tell me about it when you get home," Mark said, and hung up. He started thinking about her words. What money had she gotten? She hadn't mentioned any bonuses or raises. Moreover, if it was enough for shopping, why hadn't she mentioned it earlier? Mark found it harder to calm down. He grabbed his laptop and tried to search for information on Alex, but there was almost nothing even on social media. No photos, no public mentions, just a few old articles about his business successes. This added to his mystery. When Amanda finally came home, Mark immediately noticed her cheerful mood. She was carrying several bags with branded items. "How's everything?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "Everything's great," she replied, and went to the bedroom to unpack her shopping. "Where did the money come from?" Mark asked unexpectedly. Amanda paused for a moment, then smiled. "It's a bonus from the company. They're paying in advance because they know there's going to be a lot of work soon." "Really?" Mark pretended to believe it. "That's good." Amanda nodded and went to the kitchen to make herself coffee. Mark felt that something was off in her behavior. She had become less open, disappearing without explanation and avoiding his direct questions. The next day, on his way home from work, Mark decided to conduct a small experiment. He drove past Amanda's office, but her car wasn't there. This struck him as strange, since she had said she'd be working late. He tried to call her, but all his calls went unanswered. When she finally appeared at home, Mark asked her a simple question. "How was your day?" "Oh, just an ordinary day at work," she replied, avoiding his gaze. "Really? Because I was by your office, and your car wasn't there." Amanda flinched but quickly gathered herself. "I went to meet a client," she said, a bit irritated. "Why do you ask?" Mark didn't respond, but his doubts grew. A few days later, he decided to talk to one of her colleagues. The colleague confirmed that Amanda and Alex were still spending a lot of time together, but added a new detail. "Honestly, it's starting to look a bit strange. She seems to even be getting gifts from him. I saw her bring a new bag to work that she definitely couldn't afford before." These words completely confirmed Mark's suspicions, but he decided to proceed carefully. He needed to learn more before doing anything. The next day, Mark decided to hire a private detective to help him find out more about Amanda. The private detective followed Amanda and noticed that sometimes she didn't go to work, but instead went to some private club, one that very few people are allowed into. He also saw her with a strange man who told her she had worked well at the club and handed her an envelope. She opened it and counted the money inside. Amanda didn't tell Mark anything about the money she was now earning more. She told Alex that his dream of having a child was very nice and that she agreed to it. But she also said that she'd need to work more to earn more money. Mark didn't understand how Amanda was earning so much money. She started buying herself more expensive things, jewelry, all of it. Meanwhile, the private detective continued trying to gather more information, but he wasn't getting anywhere. He reported this to Mark, who realized he no longer needed the detective. He had to figure it all out himself, but he decided not to tell Amanda anything just yet. Mark found himself increasingly lost in his thoughts. After his conversation with the private detective, he realized that no one could help him the way he could help himself. Recently, Amanda had changed. She was buying expensive jewelry, designer clothes, and perfumes, even though her salary, even with bonuses, couldn't afford such expenses. Mark tried to find a logical explanation, but every detail only fueled his suspicions. Recently, Amanda had been busy a lot. She explained it with work, sometimes meetings with colleagues, but her stories were vague. Mark tried not to show his suspicions and acted as if everything was fine. However, when the detective reported that Amanda was visiting a private club and meeting there with a mysterious man, his patience started to run out. One evening, returning from the club, Amanda entered the apartment with a new bracelet on her wrist. Mark immediately noticed it. "New bracelet?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "Yes, do you like it?" she replied, smiling. "It's a gift from an acquaintance." "An acquaintance?" Mark repeated, trying to hide his surprise. Amanda nodded and went to the bedroom. Mark thought for a moment. Who was this acquaintance who gave such expensive gifts? He decided to take action. The next morning, when Amanda said she had to go for a meeting with a client, Mark decided to follow her. He stayed in the car near their house and waited for her to leave. When Amanda got into her car, Mark slowly drove after her. She drove several blocks and stopped near the very private club that the detective had mentioned. Mark parked at a safe distance and started watching. Amanda was there all day. In the evening, a man, tall with an elegant look, came out of the club, and Amanda was with him. They held hands. He smiled at Amanda, said something, and handed her an envelope. Amanda opened it, took a quick look at the money inside, and hid the envelope in her purse. Mark was shocked. He had never seen that expression on her face before. Confidence, even a certain pride. Who was this man? Why was she receiving money from him? And what the hell was she doing in this club? Amanda drove home, and Mark decided to wait by the club to learn more. He went inside but was immediately stopped by the security guard. "Do you have an appointment for today?" he asked. "No, I'd just like to look around," Mark replied. "Sorry, but the club is for members only," said the guard, pointing to the door. Mark had to leave, but he was already starting to make a plan. At home, he tried not to reveal his suspicions. "How was the meeting?" he asked Amanda during dinner. "Oh, everything's fine," she replied. "Alex said there are a few promising projects he wants to implement." "And you don't have any other clients now? Only working with Alex?" "Mark, Alex has really helped me make more money, plus he's almost bought our company. So yes, now I'm only working with him. Doesn't that seem strange to you?" Mark asked. "No, it doesn't," Amanda replied. Mark nodded, but his inner voice screamed otherwise. Alex was mentioned repeatedly in her conversations, and that name had become a trigger for him. Meanwhile, Mark decided to check if there was anything in Amanda's phone that could explain her behavior. One evening, when she fell asleep, he took her phone and started going through her messages. Most of them were ordinary, but one name caught his attention: Alex. Their conversation was brief, but it contained phrases that left Mark utterly confused. "Everything's ready. I'll do everything as we agreed," Amanda wrote. "Good. Remember, this must stay between us," Alex replied. Mark couldn't believe his eyes. What exactly was she supposed to do? What were they hiding? He decided not to tell her about it, but now he knew that he had to watch her every move. A few days later, Mark found out that Amanda was planning another trip to the club. This time, he decided to act differently. He found an old friend who worked in security and asked for his help. He managed to get information about the club and even a recording from the surveillance cameras. In the video, Amanda was seen entering the club and meeting Alex. They sat in one of the private rooms, and Alex handed her an envelope. Now Mark had evidence, but he wanted to know more. He decided to talk to Alex in person. The next time Amanda went to the club, Mark went there as well. He waited for Alex to come out and approached him. "We need to talk," Mark said, trying to remain calm. Alex was a bit surprised but showed no fear. "About what?" he asked. "About my wife and what's going on between you two," Mark said. Alex just smiled and said, "If you want to know the truth, you'd better ask her." Mark went home and decided not to wait any longer. Mark sat on the couch, holding his phone. The screen flashed with photos from the surveillance cameras near the club where Amanda frequently went. He was reviewing everything he had learned over the past few weeks, and this time, when she returned home, he could no longer hold back his emotions. "Amanda, we need to talk," he said when she entered the room. Her face was calm, but she noticeably held her breath upon seeing his expression. "About what?" she asked, trying to seem uninterested, though she felt deep inside that this would be a different kind of conversation. Mark didn't wait. He touched the table, and photos from the club's cameras rolled out onto the surface. He threw them one by one onto the table in front of her. "This is what I found out," he said, still trying to keep his calm. Amanda was silent, but her eyes quickly scanned the photos. Her hands began to tremble, and she tried to look away. "Amanda, tell me the truth. What are you doing there?" His voice was calm, but it carried an invisible anxiety. She sighed heavily and sat down in the chair opposite him. "I work at the club, but not in the way you think," she began. Her voice was quiet but clear. Mark glanced at the photos again, showing Amanda leaving the club, her hands holding a bag of money. "You work there because you want money? Or is it something else?" he asked, trying to understand her motives. Amanda lowered her head, seemingly trying to find the right words. "It's not just about money," she said. "Alex helped me with money, showed me how to earn, and he asked me to do some tasks. I'm just following orders. It's not what you think. I'm just doing what's needed for the business." Mark was stunned, but understood that she was hiding something else. He couldn't believe that all of this was just work. Why hadn't she told him about it earlier? "You say it's just work, but why does it seem so strange? Why do I see you meeting with him after work?" he asked. Amanda went silent. Her eyes became dull, and she felt how hard it was to maintain her composure. "It's all just part of the job," she said, trying to maintain control. I can't explain everything. You wouldn't understand. Mark felt that she was distancing herself from him more and more, and that only fueled his suspicions. Something wasn't right. He was sure the truth was much worse than she wanted to show, but he couldn't stop. He kept trying to get more details from her. I have the right to know what's going on, Amanda, he said, watching her reaction. She sighed heavily and looked up at him, as if considering whether to tell him more. It's not what you think, she finally said. I work as an assistant at the club because Alex offered me an opportunity to do more than just run the business. My role is to help him with his projects. Mark heard her pause, as if she wasn't ready to say this directly. It was blunt and uncomfortable, and she felt that now nothing could be hidden. I help him with everything he needs for his business, she added, despite her voice growing more uncertain. That's it. Nothing more, nothing less. I'm just doing tasks, like others do. But Mark wasn't satisfied. His intuition told him that this was just the tip of the iceberg. If she was doing tasks, it meant she was part of something bigger, and that bigger thing likely had far worse consequences. Amanda, you're telling me you're working for him just like that? It's all just work? He asked, unable to hide his disappointment. She couldn't look him in the eye. Her gaze dropped, and she realized that everything had long since gone wrong, far from what she had planned. Yes, it's just work, she said. There's nothing between me and Alex, just a professional relationship. I know it sounds strange, but it's true. You want a child, right? And for that, we need to earn more. I'm tired of the fact that you don't earn much. Sometimes it feels like you're just mocking me, like you don't want anything in life. You look worthless, Mark. Mark was deeply offended. He didn't understand why Amanda had said this to him so harshly. Mark didn't know how to react. He felt that she was telling the truth, but on the other hand, something wasn't right. He couldn't understand what exactly. What was she hiding? What was going on between her and Alex? How can I know that it's the truth? How can I be sure that these are not just your words to calm me down? His voice sounded frustrated, but he tried to remain calm. Mark sat on the couch, holding his phone. The screen flashed with photos from the surveillance cameras near the club where Amanda frequently went. He was reviewing everything he had learned over the past few weeks, and this time, when she returned home, he could no longer hold back his emotions. Amanda, we need to talk, he said when she entered the room. Her face was calm, but she noticeably held her breath upon seeing his expression. About what? She asked, trying to seem uninterested, though she felt deep inside that this would be a different kind of conversation. Mark didn't wait. He touched the table, and photos from the club's cameras rolled out onto the surface. He threw them one by one onto the table in front of her. This is what I found out, he said, still trying to keep his calm. Amanda was silent, but her eyes quickly scanned the photos. Her hands began to tremble, and she tried to look away. Amanda, tell me the truth. What are you doing there? His voice was calm, but it carried an invisible anxiety. She sighed heavily and sat down in the chair opposite him. I work at the club, but not in the way you think, she began. Her voice was quiet but clear. Mark glanced at the photos again, showing Amanda leaving the club, her hands holding a bag of money. You work there because you want money? Or is it something else? He asked, trying to understand her motives. Amanda lowered her head, seemingly trying to find the right words. It's not just about money, she said. Alex helped me with money, showed me how to earn, and he asked me to do some tasks. I'm just following orders. It's not what you think. I'm just doing what's needed for the business. Mark was stunned, but understood that she was hiding something else. He couldn't believe that all of this was just work. Why hadn't she told him about it earlier? You say it's just work, but why does it seem so strange? Why do I see you meeting with him after work? He asked. Amanda went silent. Her eyes became dull, and she felt how hard it was to maintain her composure. It's all just part of the job, she said, trying to maintain control. I can't explain everything. You wouldn't understand. Mark felt that she was distancing herself from him more and more, and that only fueled his suspicions. Something wasn't right. He was sure the truth was much worse than she wanted to show, but he couldn't stop. He kept trying to get more details from her. I have the right to know what's going on, Amanda, he said, watching her reaction. She sighed heavily and looked up at him, as if considering whether to tell him more. "It's not what you think," she finally said. "I work as an assistant at the club because Alex offered me an opportunity to do more than just run the business. My role is to help him with his projects." Mark heard her pause, as if she wasn't ready to say this directly. It was blunt and uncomfortable, and she felt that now nothing could be hidden. "I help him with everything he needs for his business," she added, despite her voice growing more uncertain. "That's it. Nothing more, nothing less. I'm just doing tasks, like others do." But Mark wasn't satisfied. His intuition told him that this was just the tip of the iceberg. If she was doing tasks, it meant she was part of something bigger, and that bigger thing likely had far worse consequences. "Amanda, you're telling me you're working for him just like that? It's all just work?" he asked, unable to hide his disappointment. She couldn't look him in the eye. Her gaze dropped, and she realized that everything had long since gone wrong, far from what she had planned. "Yes, it's just work," she said. "There's nothing between me and Alex, just a professional relationship. I know it sounds strange, but it's true. You want a child, right? And for that, we need to earn more. I'm tired of the fact that you don't earn much. Sometimes it feels like you're just mocking me, like you don't want anything in life. You look worthless, Mark." Mark was deeply offended. He didn't understand why Amanda had said this to him so harshly. Mark didn't know how to react. He felt that she was telling the truth, but on the other hand, something wasn't right. He couldn't understand what exactly. What was she hiding? What was going on between her and Alex? "How can I know that it's the truth? How can I be sure that these are not just your words to calm me down?" His voice sounded frustrated, but he tried to remain calm. Amanda glanced at him again, and a tear glistened in her eyes. She turned away, as if trying to find the strength within herself to say more. "Do you want to know the truth? I'm not cheating on you with Alex. I'm working for him to make more money, and I'm tired of you not wanting to change anything in your life. You're so attached to your illusions that you don't see how everything is falling apart." Mark was silent because he didn't know what to say. All this time, he had tried to keep faith in his wife, but what he had just heard made him doubt everything. Now he was sure of nothing. He walked to the window and looked out at the street. Darkness covered the city, and a whirlwind of thoughts spun in his head. What should he do? How could he go on living with all of this? Amanda came up to him and placed her hand on his shoulder. "I've done everything for you to be happy, Mark," she said quietly, but his heart felt her words as if they were an excuse. "But you haven't changed. You're still the same powerless man I once loved." Mark didn't reply. He just stood there, staring at her hand on his shoulder, feeling how their connection was gradually breaking apart. The next day, when Mark still hadn't fully processed Amanda's words from the previous night, he was ready for any surprises. But what happened exceeded all his expectations. He was sitting on the couch, staring blankly, when suddenly the door opened, and Amanda walked into the room. But along with her was Alex, and also a small boy, around 8 years old, with big sad eyes. Mark looked at them, not understanding what was happening. "Who is this?" Mark asked as they entered the room. He stood up, and his voice sounded confused. Amanda freed her hands and, despite Mark's expression, said calmly, "This is my son, Edward." Mark couldn't stand it. He stood there, not believing his ears. He involuntarily glanced at Alex, and Alex, in turn, immediately noticed Mark's gaze. His face remained calm, even somewhat distant. "How is this possible?" Mark asked, though he felt that this was shocking news. He couldn't understand why Amanda had kept such an important part of her life hidden. Amanda sighed deeply and looked at the son she had brought with her. The boy remained silent, staring attentively at Mark. Then she turned to her husband and spoke softly, with a heavy expression on her face. "I didn't want to tell you about this, Mark. It's a very complicated story. When I had Edward, I was very young. His father was a wealthy man, but he didn't want to marry me. He took our son through the courts, and I didn't have the right to see him. I tried to find a way to get him back, but it was difficult. All these years, I've worked to have the chance to meet with him." Mark remained silent, listening to her. His heart beat faster, and he felt that everything he knew about his wife was crumbling. He couldn't understand why she had never told him about this before. "And you didn't tell me?" he asked, shocked, his voice sounding pained. I thought you didn't want more children. Now I understand why. Amanda looked at him, her gaze sad, but she didn't try to justify herself. I didn't want you to know, Mark. It's a tough story, and I didn't want you to worry about it. But now I understand that I need to tell you the truth. I'm looking for all opportunities to see my son again. And Alex helped me. Alex stood nearby, observing the scene, and his voice sounded calm, but with a firm certainty. I helped Amanda financially and also through my connections, so she could regain the right to meet with her son, he said. It's not easy, but we're on the right track. Mark couldn't believe his ears. He looked at Alex, then at Amanda, and his heart was filled with pain from the realization that everything he had strived for suddenly looked different. The same Alex, whom he had considered just his wife's business partner, had become some unclear element of their life. And now? What does this mean for me? Mark asked, not knowing what to think. I don't even understand how we ended up here. You not only hid your child from me, but now you want Alex to be part of this situation? Amanda sighed again, and her face grew serious. I'm not saying that Alex will replace you, Mark, she said, but he has the connections and resources to help me get my rights to my son. Alex can adopt him, since his father died a year ago, and I only found out about it now. He can become part of our family if we need him to, but I don't want to hide it. I want you to understand. I love you, but I have other priorities. Mark didn't know how to respond. His life, which once seemed certain and clear to him, was now falling apart into pieces. His gaze fell on Amanda's son, on the boy who stood before him. It hurt, but he couldn't understand what hurt more. The very fact that she had hidden this from him, or the thought that he was no longer important in her life. I don't know how to understand all of this, Amanda, he said quietly. My main problem right now is that you didn't tell me the truth. Maybe you even think the truth is something that should be hidden. But now I have to make a choice. And I don't know if I want to be part of this. Amanda looked at him, and a sorrowful expression appeared in her eyes again. She knew that all of this was difficult, but she was determined in her decisions. Alex and she stood on the threshold of change, but what was happening was still too much for Mark to accept. I'm not asking you to choose right now, Mark. Just be with me, if you can. Alex, leaving them for a moment, disappeared through the door, leaving Mark with Amanda and her son. Amanda followed Mark outside, took his hand, and together they returned home. Sit down, Mark, Amanda said with a serious expression on her face. I know this is all very hard, but it's better if you sit down because the next news will be even harder. Mark simply nodded, though inside, everything was storming. He didn't understand what Amanda was preparing for him, but deep down, he felt that what he was about to hear would change everything. He sat down on the couch, and Amanda sat beside him, once again holding his hand. Alex stood in the doorway, watching them with the same, almost expressionless smile. Amanda, what do you want to say? Mark asked, trying to understand what was going on. He had noticed that Amanda looked tense, as if she were hesitating. I took a test, Mark, Amanda began, sighing deeply, and I'm pregnant. Mark didn't even react, though his heart started to race. He didn't understand where this conversation was going, but he felt that this was something important. I don't know who it's from, Amanda continued, her voice growing softer. From you or from Alex? I don't know, Mark. Mark lifted his head, and his face froze. All his thoughts scattered, and he just sat there, not knowing what to say. Are you serious? He asked, his voice barely audible from shock. You mean you've been cheating on me with Alex? But you said it was just a working relationship. How could I not see this? Amanda started crying, burying her face in her hands. She couldn't control her emotions, and even her words didn't sound as convincing as they had before. You don't understand, she said through tears. I couldn't do it any other way. This was the only option to get my son back. Alex helped me. He said I had to be with him to get Edward back. You don't understand that his father died a year ago, and he was left alone. I couldn't leave him. I had to act, Mark. Mark felt his heart ache from these words. He sat there, listening to her explanation, but they couldn't change what had happened. His life was in ruins now. He couldn't understand why Amanda had decided to hide all of this from him, why she couldn't tell him earlier. But why didn't you tell me earlier? He asked, feeling completely powerless. You promised me everything would be okay, that I was important to you. Now you're telling me it was all to get your son back? And I'm part of this? Amanda lifted her eyes to him, but their gazes didn't meet. She couldn't look him in the eye because she knew the pain he felt was her fault. I didn't want to hide it, she said quietly. I was afraid you wouldn't understand. You always wanted us to be together, and I was afraid that if I told you the truth, it would break us. I just didn't know how to explain it all. Alex, standing aside, once again took his place and looked at Mark with an expression that promised nothing good. Listen, Mark, he said, not looking away. I don't want to be the one at fault here, but you have to understand that Amanda was in a hopeless situation. We were all in this together, and now it's important to think about the future. Maybe we can find a way to make things right. Mark didn't respond. He just looked at Alex, then at Amanda. It all seemed unreal to him. He didn't know if he was ready to continue this path, if he was ready to forgive her. He felt that every step he took now would change everything, but he didn't know in which direction. I don't know what to do next, Amanda, he said, his words slow. I don't know if I can continue with you, knowing everything that's happened. But I need to know the truth. You have to tell me who the father of this child is. Amanda lowered her head again, her tears flowing non-stop. She knew Mark had a right to an answer, and although her heart was breaking, she had to lay everything bare. I don't know, Mark, her voice cracked. I don't know who it's from. Maybe it's from you. Maybe it's from Alex. But I had to do this to get my son back. Now everything was clear to Mark. He couldn't believe that his life had changed so drastically because of a betrayal he never expected. And even if he was ready to forgive, he didn't know if he would ever be able to trust Amanda again. Mark decided that despite his wife's confession, he needed to come to terms with it and be alone. He couldn't stand seeing his wife Amanda betray him with Alex, especially now that her son Edward was living in their house. Mark drove to his parents' house. He waited for the DNA test to come back so he could find out who the real father of the child Amanda was pregnant with was. Time passed, and Mark had almost no contact with Amanda. She called him and asked him to come home. Mark pulled himself together and drove over. He didn't know what to expect, but he tried to remain calm. He entered their home. Everything was quiet, and he immediately noticed that Amanda was sitting on the couch with Alex. They were holding hands, and the way they looked at each other. Amanda looked up when she saw him and gave a slight smile. There was no confusion in her eyes, more peace than ever before. Mark, we've done all the tests, Amanda said, trying to speak calmly, but her words sounded like a verdict. The results showed that the father of this child is Alex. Mark froze in place. He couldn't believe his ears. He looked at them, at how they sat together, and in his mind, there was only one thought. This is the end. His entire reality, all his certainty in their relationship, had collapsed. You've taken everything from me, he blurted out, unable to hold back his anger. My home, my future plans, even my desire to become a father. You cheated on me. How could you? But Amanda didn't get scared, didn't start crying as she used to. She was calm, even emotionless. I realized I don't love you, Mark. Her words were clear and confident. You're a worthless man who never helped me the way I wanted. You didn't support me. You weren't the man I was looking for. Alex is the one who brought my son back and gave me hope for a new future. He became the man I needed, and you just stayed the man I could no longer be with. Mark stood there, silently listening to her words. They were like blows, each word killing something in him. He was no longer the same man who had left the house a few weeks ago. He felt his whole world crumbling, everything he once knew and loved falling apart. You can't just say that, Amanda, he said, trying to speak calmly, though everything inside him was turned upside down. I did everything for you. Why couldn't I be the one you needed? Why didn't you tell me this earlier? Amanda didn't respond immediately. She looked at Alex and then turned back to Mark. Because I was afraid, she said quietly. I was afraid you wouldn't understand that I couldn't live in a world where nothing changes anymore. I couldn't wait for you to change, Mark. I couldn't bear the pressure anymore. Mark didn't know how to react. He felt his strength draining away. He was no longer ready for this fight, and he didn't even know if he wanted to win it. But the question remained. What should he do next? He silently turned and walked out of the house. He had never felt so wounded. His thoughts were heavy, and he drove back to his parents, not knowing what would come next. Amanda and Alex stayed home. But would this be the beginning of their new life? Would Mark have a chance to change everything, or had it completely destroyed him? What would you do in Mark's place? Would you leave Amanda after her betrayal, or would you try to rebuild the relationship? Share your thoughts in the comments.